Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third edition of Archer Talks. Just to give you a little background on Archer Talks is a forum organized by high school classes 1965 and college 70 of De La Salle, Manila. And with me present are the conveners. Aside from me, we have Bobby Claudio, Red Mayo, Billy Del Rosario, Jorge Gonzalez, Monsica. So basically, that's the group that put this forum together in order to provide an opportunity for everyone, including Lasallians, to be part of the national conversation on any issue of importance. Now, just to make sure that we have a smooth and seamless program flow, everybody will be muted except for me, certain panelists, and of course our guest speaker. Also, we will have, right after this, we will have the invocation, the national anthem, introduction of the speaker, and then the brief remarks of our speaker, and then an extended open forum, and then acknowledgement and concluding remarks. Before we start, I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Vice Consul and Third Secretary, Vice Consul and Third Secretary Mark Dominic Lim, who is with the ambassador. So may I now call on our convener, Bobby Claudio, to lead us in prayer.
Let's remember that we're in the holy presence of God, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Heavenly Father, we praise you for the democratic freedom we enjoy in the Philippines. Yet freedom is never more than one generation from extinction. As Filipino citizens, teach us to be vigilant and discerning to ensure the well-being of future generations. Give us wisdom in understanding recent events that threaten to engulf our country, and to have the strength and the courage to do what is best interest of the country by whatever means, as we did in EDSA not so long ago, to restore our democracy to its former pristine state. To honor this state, we extend our deepest condolences on the death of our President, Benigno Noynoy Aquino, for serving the country, and who in turn were served by several of our classmates and friends. May he rest in peace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father.
Ambassador Jose Manuel del Gallego Romualdez was appointed Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to the United States of America in July 27 by President Rodrigo Duterte. On 29 November 2017, he presented his credentials to the U.S. President and formally assumed office as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary. Additionally, as the head of the Philippine Embassy in Washington, D.C., Ambassador Romualdez is concurrently the Philippines emissary to the Commonwealth of Jamaica, Republic of Haiti, Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua, and Barbuda, Bahamas, Barbados, Dominica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Lucia. Prior to his appointment, Ambassador Romualdez was designated as a special envoy of the Philippine President to the United States. He also served as member of the Philippine business delegations visiting the US, China, Japan, and New Zealand from 1989 to 2012. Ambassador Romualdez has extensive experience as a media practitioner and business executive. He used to be the chief executive officer of the Stargate Media Corporation and publisher of People Asia magazine of the Philippine Star Group. He was president of the Manila Overseas Press Club and vice president of the Rotary Club of Manila. Ambassador Romualdez writes columns for the Philippine Star, and all his columns have a wide following of readers, both in the Philippines and abroad. Born and raised in Manila, Ambassador Romualdez received a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from De La Salle College in 1970. He plays golf as a pastime and is affiliated with the Manila Golf Club and the Manila Polo Club. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, my honor to introduce, may I ask Ambassador Romualdez, may I ask Ambassador Romualdez to commence his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Popoy, for that very long introduction, but thank you anyway. Well, it's very nice to see a lot of our schoolmates in La Salle. I haven't seen them. Well, Bobby, I've seen him, I think, maybe many years ago, and Billy and all the rest. But I always enjoy really getting together with my La Salle friends. As you know, I think, I must say that I have learned in the world of diplomacy, actually I learned it in La Salle, because in La Salle you have to know how to get along with everybody. And that's probably why we have quite a number of La Sallites who have served as diplomats in many places all over the world. Well, again, thank you very much for the organizers of this Archer Talk and for inviting me to this forum to discuss the relations between the Philippines and the United States. This could not have come at a better time, as our two countries will celebrate 75 years of friendship and partnership this coming July 4. Aside from the 75th year anniversary of the Philippines-US diplomatic relations, another milestone that we will be celebrating is the 70th year anniversary since the signing of the Mutual Defense Treaty in 1951. So it is indeed a momentous year, but more than that, or more than the celebrations, this is really the time to think about how the relations can further evolve and expand so that it remains relevant in the face of new threats and challenges. As you all know, the relationship is not without its highs and lows. Regardless of era or administration, pandemic or not, the Philippines will always work with its allies like the United States, but also with other partners like China on shared concerns. We here at the embassy, the consulates and the Philippine government, will navigate the diplomatic scene to ensure that opportunities are maximized and that for the balance to be in favor of the Filipino people. And although the pandemic may have marginally affected the way diplomacy is done, through it all, what has remained constant is our two countries' commitment, reinforced by our people's shared desire for the Philippine-US relationship to endure and flourish. This commitment was further reaffirmed recently by President Biden when he wrote to President Duterte on the occasion of the two upcoming milestones. In his letter, President Biden also assured that the United States would stand shoulder to shoulder with the Philippines to ensure both our nations' security. I can say that in all the years that I have dealt with the United States, this has been the strongest statement yet that emanated from the White House on the U.S. commitment to come to our defense, especially in the context of the West Philippine Sea. The United States has both rejected China's maritime claims in the West Philippine Sea and reaffirmed the applicability of the Mutual Defense Treaty in case of an attack against us in that part of the globe. Without a doubt, the presence of the United States in the West Philippine Sea is very crucial, especially to counterbalance against other nations' aggressive and illegal actions. I can say that the majority of Filipinos want to see the United States completely to be engaged into the Philippines, not to heighten tensions, but to deter against further aggression. But more than coming to our aid, the US also helps us prepare to defend ourselves by beefing up our defense capabilities, which has been a top priority for President Duterte. In fact, we have received an offer from the US government to transfer the Cyclone-class vessels that will help the Philippine Navy patrol our maritime territory, particularly in the disputed areas. Let me just stress that the Philippines is for the peaceful resolution of the disputes and conflicts, including in the West Philippine Sea. At a time when the whole world is still reeling from this pandemic, we could all use a period of peace and cooperation among many countries. Speaking of the pandemic, the Philippines also welcomes the Biden administration's renewed commitment to work with allies and partners to tackle the global challenges, and that includes finally putting an end to the spread of COVID-19. I'm very pleased to announce that after months of persistent and sustained efforts to bring US manufactured vaccines to the Philippines, 2 million doses of AstraZeneca and 1.3 million doses of the Pfizer vaccines were delivered to Manila last May through the COVAX facility and with the help of the United States. The United States, as you know, is the largest contributor to COVAX. We also just received our first vaccines or Moderna vaccines over the weekend, timely for our government's ramp up of its vaccination program. We can anticipate that more vaccines will get into the arms of Filipinos back home as the US works with Australia, India, and Japan on a vaccine distribution arrangement specifically for the peoples of the Indo-Pacific region. As the United States and other developed countries reach their vaccination goals, vaccine distribution to other countries are now much easier to negotiate for. The COVAX facility also recently announced their strategy to increase the limit of advanced market commitment to hard-hit countries from 20% to 30% of the country's population. At this point, allow me to mention the important role that Filipinos in the United States play in calling on the US government to make available at the earliest possible time the US vaccines that we purchased. In the true spirit of Bayanihan, our Filipino-American communities all over the United States have banded together to call for early vaccines delivery. They are also putting together resources, including much-needed medical supplies that will help our friends and kababayans back home deal with the pandemic. While we work relentlessly to immunize our people, we also continue to engage our US government and private sector counterparts, as well as our diaspora, to highlight our country as an attractive investment destination and the pathway to Asia in a post-pandemic world. Our strong economic fundamentals and continuing implementation of infrastructure initiatives under the Build program assure us of a strong recovery. The pandemic has created opportunities to fast-track the digitalization and a clean and green recovery. We intend to seize these and many others and welcome new and enhanced partnership with our American friends in terms of investments and capacity, building in critical sectors such as aerospace, IT IBM or IT BPM creatives, IT and electronics manufacturing, energy, agriculture, telecommunications, and healthcare. Our IT BPM industry, for one, has remained active amid the pandemic, quickly returning to almost 100% capacity despite the community quarantine with the support of the government. The Philippines continues to provide opportunities for US companies to grow their business and improve their operations in the new normal with the development of more IT hubs and digital cities throughout the country. Finally, there are many aspects to our ties with the United States. People to people remains the anchor of our bilateral relations. The pandemic has increased the visibility of the Filipino-American community as thousands of Filipino-American frontliners and essential workers perform their duties with utmost excellence, dedication, and compassion. The Biden administration's commitment to eradicating discrimination and achieving racial equality also bodes well for the continued progress of the broader Asian American and Pacific Islander groups, including Filipino Americans in the United States. Educational and cultural exchanges continue to be robust even during the pandemic, and the Philippine and US governments are working together on further improving the exchange experience. So although the pandemic has affected our targets and way of doing things for more than a year, the Philippine-US relations will overcome this challenge just as it did in years past. As we say here in Washington, the Philippines and the United States will continue to work together and thrive together, starting with the COVID-19 recovery initiatives and post-pandemic cooperation. Thank you, and I'm now ready for any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Romualdez. That was a very comprehensive and informative and instructive opening remarks. And as you have pointed out, our relationship with the United States is at several levels. One is bilateral, one is regional, and the other one is global. And a lot of these issues will be asked of you along the way. We have up to around 11:30, so we have more than an hour and a half. Now, the first question is, in the transition from the Trump to the Biden administration last January, and as of this point, did you notice any significant change in the tone, in the attitude towards Philippines-US relations?
Well, actually, as a matter of fact, I think it is even, I can just say much better now. Why? Because, well, first of all, when after November 3, we immediately reached out to the people around President Biden. Fortunately, we knew some of those, some of his close advisors, and they're now in government, like Eli Ratner, who is now with the Pentagon. Of course, Tony Blinken, who is now his state secretary. We reached out to them almost a week after November 3, when it was clear that President Biden was going to be the next president of the United States. And then shortly after, we advised the Malacanang, through the chief of protocol, that it would be probably appropriate for President Duterte to reach out and write a congratulatory letter to President Biden, of which we received it almost immediately. And that one, we sent it through the channels that we were able to open to the Biden administration. So that set the tone, actually, so to speak. And I think that move that was made by President Duterte helped us here in Washington, D.C., to be able to immediately hit the ground running. And as a matter of fact, we were so pleased that we sent another note from us, from the embassy, congratulating the new president-elect, and also President Kamala Harris. And that one, again, helped us in our communication. And right after they took over, Secretary Blinken immediately called Secretary Locsin, and they had a very good conversation. Secretary Miller called up Secretary Lorenzana, again, to assure the Philippines that we, as started by the Trump administration, that we have your back, meaning to say that they will honor the Mutual Defense Treaty. So I think that overall, our relationship now is, I would say, in a better place than we were over the past couple of years.
Thank you. Next question is related to the military relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines. Do you expect the VFA and the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, to be confirmed shortly or within 6 months from now?
Well, we are hopeful that we will see the VFA and the EDCA sort of like permanently agreed on. As you know, we had both panels, the U.S. and the Philippine panels, have been under discussion over the past 3 months, since January, since the Biden administration took over. And we were able to come out with what we call the Terms of Agreement, or the TOA, which would essentially really improve the current VFA agreement that we have. And we sent that to President Duterte, I think, about a month and a half ago. And of course, the United States was quite anxious to find out whether we were going to go ahead with the VFA or not. So we had a meeting with the president, and I told him that perhaps if he still wants to study the new terms of agreement, if he could renew it for another 6 months. I think we're confident that the new terms of agreement would probably be quite acceptable, or a much better version of what we had, and hopefully that'll continue, especially at this time. As I said, it's very important for us to have this a strong relationship with our only treaty ally in the Pacific.
Okay, now, what are the quote-unquote thorny issues in this DFA and EDCA that have to be tweaked in order to have a final settlement?
I think we all know what happened in the past, especially on the custody issue. I think I'd like to share it with our friends in Dasal that that the custody issue has been resolved by building a facility that will be inside our camps. Since this is basically like a martial, I mean, a military tribunal will be the one to try the whoever, or not really a military tribunal, but a military officer or a military soldier that is involved in any kind of crime. It'll be in the custody of the Philippines, but mutual. In other words, it will be dual. It will also have U.S. Officials that will take care of the custody, which is what happened really with the Pemberton case. They were inside the camp, but they were Private Pemberton was placed in well, at that time it was like a what do you call that? One of those things that they use for the ships. They turned it into a room with U.S. Marines also guarding him.
This is a speculative question, in effect, but I've been asked to ask it. Under the VFA, will the U.S. take military action if a Philippine Coast Guard ship or Philippine ship is fired upon and damaged inside the West Philippine Sea?
Yes, they will. It is part of the Mutual Defense Treaty that if within our territory, any one of our ships that is, especially those belonging to our Philippine Navy, for instance, or our Coast Guard, the United States is compelled to help us. But one very important aspect here that was made very clear, which I think President Duterte wanted to be sure of, is that they will only do that if we ask them to do so. It is not automatic for them, because the reason for that is that we all know that there is a very strong competition now. We'll call it competition between the United States and China. And we don't want to be, at least President Duterte feels that we don't want to be dragged into a situation where it is not really our so-called fight. But if it's within our territory, then it is, we can, in fact, invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. And the United States is compelled to help us.
Okay. Still, on military matters, and later on we can move on to the economics. How many and what specific warplanes will be donated or sold to the Philippine Armed Forces by the United States?
Well, we've already received something like 11 new Black Hawk helicopters. Unfortunately, one has crashed the other week, I think. But these are all brand new helicopters, which has been approved for sale to the Philippines, even if it was ostensibly coming from Poland, which is still a licensee of the Black Hawk helicopters. And we also have, they just recently announced the approval for the sale of 12 F-16s for our Air Force. These are these aircrafts are of the newer model, and they're suited for the Philippines because they can be airborne for many hours without having to be refueled, and so they can patrol our shores and our borders very easily, and they can also use this for special operations. There are many other things that they're offering the Philippines, and some of them are being given to us. I'm not at liberty to disclose any of them, since some of them are quite confidential. But but more or less, we're getting a lot more than we've ever expected over the past 5 years. Total about somewhere anywhere between 570 to $600 million worth of equipment and hardware that's coming from the United States.
Mr. Ambassador, do you think that this increased assistance, military assistance, can be attributed to the tensions here within the West Philippine Sea?
There is no question about that. As I said, we're in a good place because we are trying to, as they say, we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. So we want to have good relations with China, as I'm sure you know that's the reason why we reached out to them. At least that's what President Duterte did when he took over in 2016. And we have our fellow Lasallian as our ambassador there, who has done a great job in making sure that China remains engaged with us. And I tell you, it has helped us to a certain extent because the availability, for instance, of vaccines came from China first. People may not see that as an advantage, but it is an advantage to a certain extent because we only were able to get the vaccines here because the vaccines coming from the West, most specifically from the United States, had to be, they have to take care of themselves first before they start exporting. And that's the reason why there was a very short supply of any vaccines coming from the West. But China was able to give us several billions way ahead of time, which has helped us to a certain extent in managing and controlling the pandemic. And this is because we have a fairly good relations with them right now. But it doesn't mean that we're giving up any of our territorial claims.
Now on the people-to-people aspect, which is a vital part in the relationship between our two countries. Will the U.S. require vaccination passports for its local citizens and visitors, like Filipinos arriving, let's say, from the Philippines?
No, they don't require any. All they want is just for Filipinos to be tested, and if they're tested negative, I think they sign something at the airport before boarding the plane, and they're free to come to the United States. If they've not been vaccinated, they're free to get their vaccines here. So this is a different thing. In fact, one of the complaints that we have, especially Filipino Americans, is that they have to be quarantined even if they've been fully vaccinated. But I understand that we've been able to lower it now to 7 days, and that if you're tested negative after 3 or 4 days, you can go home. But I guess that's important for us because number one, we still have not reached a level that is comfortable enough for us to say that we have close to a herd immunity that everyone is waiting for. But I think we'll be seeing a lot of vaccines coming into the Philippines in the next 2 to 3 months. There'll be a ramp up of these vaccines, and hopefully, as Secretary Galvez said, by the end of this year, by December, we will have a good Christmas where people don't have to wear masks or the face shields.
Another question here this time on immigration matters. Is the Biden administration planning on another INS, that's the Naturalization Service, amnesty for overstaying illegal visitors?
There's been a lot of talk about that. One of the senators who is very much into immigration laws and reviving, sort of like improving the immigration laws of the United States is Senator Hirono. She is actually from Hawaii. She has a very big Filipino community in her state. And we've had several meetings with her in the past. And she was telling us that she would like to see the laws on giving amnesty, especially because she sees that we have so many Filipinos here in the United States that are very much appreciated. Every time I go to the U.S. Senate or the U.S. Congress here, every time I meet with them, of course, they have a lot of issues against, as you know, on human rights and all that. But at the end of the day, we end up talking about the Filipino community in their district or in their area, and they're very pleased with them and they're very proud. And that gives us a good feeling that we really are very much appreciated here in this country. And so I think that for one thing, Filipinos will have a better break in terms of the immigration laws that are being, I suppose, reviewed, and at the same time, they may have a better deal in the next couple of during this Biden administration, in the next couple of months.
Mr. Ambassador, since you brought it up, what do we expect, or what can we expect in terms of how these human rights issues can be resolved, or will it be resolved, or what is the future of that particular issue with respect to the United States?
I think it is very clear to them that they have pointed it out to us, and we depend a lot on the figures that are being given to us by our Department of Justice. And the only thing that I tell them is that we have improved quite a bit over the past 2 years since the drug war has been initiated by the Duterte administration. And that all of these killings, as we probably are aware of, is that were perpetrated by many of the law enforcers who were themselves involved in drugs. And so I think the figure that was given to me, the last one, was about close to 6,000 police officers have been charged or dismissed from the service because they were involved in drugs themselves. Hopefully, we're managing it much better than it was in the very beginning. We didn't realize how serious it was, the drug situation in the Philippines, until this one was put wide open, so to speak. So we are hoping that the United States will see that as an opportunity to, again, be a little more open in knowing that we are trying to solve a problem that is really very serious, not only with us, but in many countries around the world. So that's the way we approach this, and that's how we explain many of these issues that are being thrown at the government.
We would like to remind our participants in this forum to write your questions in the chat box so that we can ask Ambassador Romualdez about them. Now, is there any progress on the bill versus Asian hate crimes in the U.S.?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they passed a law here, a very strict law on anti-Asian the hate crimes, which was recently signed by President Biden. The vote came out to something like 91 to 2 that were against it, mostly from the Midwest senators. But this is now a new law here, which is very strong in terms of how they will be able to prosecute and punish those that are perpetrating the hate crimes. Unfortunately, they still continue right now. As a matter of fact, we just one of our consuls in San Francisco was a victim of these hate crimes. It's a good thing that she was able to go back to the consulate after several people were approaching her and throwing invectives. And you know, the sad part here is that one of them was actually a Filipino American. And in fact, she shouted back and said that Filipino ako. You know, this is quite. It's really something that's very disturbing that you have Filipino Americans that are actually involved in this anti-Asian hate crimes. But hopefully, like in New York, they have a lot of undercover agents or officers that are now going around, and many have been caught, especially in the subways in New York, because of this operation that they have in terms of, and many of them are actually of Asian descent.
Now, let's shift to the economic relationships. What are the major issues now between the U.S. and the Philippines on trade, economic issues, and business matters? What would be, how would you assess it?
Well, I think the major concern that they always have is the laws and the Constitution, which prohibits them from owning 100%. But from what I'm told by Secretary Dominguez, they've been able to now changed many of those things by what they call an enabling law, I suppose, that they can now own 100% certain sectors of our businesses. No, so that is a good sign, and also the new tax laws are also something that they welcome. But one of the things that I keep on telling them, and I'm sure that we've had this problem, is sometimes when we change laws or we change rules midstream, that is where the real problem comes in. When we do that, businessmen obviously don't like things like that, and that is the major complaint that they have. Sometimes we have a rule, they follow it, and then midstream or halfway through their business activity, we change it. This is what happened for instance, in Malampaya. The Chevron pulled out completely already because they changed the tax rules or the tax laws or anything involving the tax of that particular franchise that they had. So these are things that we have to really watch out for, and hopefully Secretary Dominguez and our economic managers will really see that as something that we really have to clean up and make sure that it doesn't happen. Clark, by the way, right now is very much in the radar screen of many businesses here in the United States. There are many of them who have gone to Clark, and they're very impressed at the way we were able to redevelop the former air base. And there are quite a number of companies that are now looking at relocating from China to the Philippines because they see the Philippines as a great place to have. And the reason also for that is because FedEx has now opened this new hub. It's a big hub that they moved from China to Clark. That is a big advantage for many businesses here in the United States, and that's why they're looking at Clark Air Base as a major place for them to move out of China, or some of them are just simply opening new places to be able to manufacture some of their goods or their services.
Do you expect any, since you said the Americans are taking a second look at Clark, do you expect any major investment initiative in the next year or so, foreign direct investment from the United States?
Well, I think we are in the process. We just recently were able, during the pandemic, it's called SBA Telecommunications. They build towers, and they set up shop in Clark, actually, as their base. But they're out to build 50 towers that is part of our digitalization of all our 7,600 islands. So they're going to build 50 of this, and they plan to build more throughout the Asian region, and they want to use Clark as their hub. So that's one major industry, for instance, that's coming in. And the other ones are, we have a number of pharmaceutical companies. As you know, we're giving them a lot of incentives, learning from this pandemic, and this pandemic is not going to go away anytime soon. So we've been able to put, for instance, Novavax, we've been able to put them together with United Drug. They possibly would look into Clark because we put up a virology institute where they will be able to sort of like a place where they can do a lot of research on the viruses that will be forthcoming down the road in the next couple of years as things evolve. So these are the things that we were looking at and actively trying to promote the Philippines as a good place for them to set up shop. And you have to remember exactly what President Trump said. The Philippines is one of the most expensive real estate in the Asian region. Why? Because we are right in the center. Geographically, our location is one of the best, if not the best.
Now, we shift a little to the USAID and its involvement in the Philippines. Well, as we all know, the head of the USAID in the Philippines, at least in the US, by the way, well, is a Filipina, Philan. I don't know if she still is, Miss Gloria Yoya Dino, no? Who was a student of mine at Marymount. And how do you foresee level and extent of development aid? How do you see it going in the next several years with the Biden administration coming in?
Well, well, Gloria Steele, unfortunately, has finally retired. She was there temporarily. She was taken in by the Biden administration, but I think she opted to retire completely already. The new person, I forgot the name of the person, but they're quite actively looking at many aspects of where they can put some of their aid. But one of the things here that we have to look at, Popoy, is the DFC, or the Development uh, Finance Corporation of the United States, which has been funded very recently by the US Congress. And they're looking at infrastructure, and they are prepared. It's a different kind of program that they have, where they want to do joint ventures with companies in the Philippines, especially the medium-sized ones, and be part of the development of these companies. And they're willing to put money into it. They're willing to play a role in the company. So this is a very good plan that they have. Aside from the infrastructure of roads, bridges, and so forth, and airports, they want to also invest in businesses that they see, especially in the outlying areas of the provinces, where they can now invest. Fortunately for us, the name of the fellow who is now running the DFC is David Marchik, who knows the Philippines very well. Apparently, he was there as an investment banker of some sort, but he knows a lot of people in the Philippines, and he loves the Philippines. So he says he's going to really push hard for having more investments coming from the DFC. Another one is the USTDA. They're setting up shop in the US Embassy in Manila. The USTDA is a trade office, but they are very much plugged into a lot of companies here in the United States. They're going to set up shop in the Philippines, one of their major places where they're going to set up in Asia. So again, those are opportunities that will be open for us in the next decade or so.
One of the priorities of the Biden administration, two of them are: one, renewable energy, and the second one is climate change. In fact, one of the first steps that President Biden took was to go back to the agreement. So how does that impact the Philippines, insofar as our relationship with the United States is concerned?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part, Popoy.
There are two concerns of the United States globally. One is sustainable energy, and the second one is climate change. Now, in fact, Biden administration, one of its first steps was to go back to the agreement that was abandoned by the Trump administration. How would this concern and priority given to climate change benefit the Philippines, given our own problems here on climate change?
Well, I think that's the best thing that ever happened. We all know what climate change can do. I've seen it myself personally, and I'll never forget 2013, November of 2013, when the biggest typhoon that ever hit any country in the world hit the Philippines, and specifically Leyte, where 10,000 people died. So we know that is caused by climate change, and it's happening here in the United States like anything. So I think that that move made by President Biden is very much welcome for countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand, and other countries that are going through difficulties because of climate change. So with that, with the Biden administration coming very strong in the climate change, together with that is already now they're looking at alternate sources of energy. And that is another opportunity that's wide open for the Philippines. I know that, for instance, the Rason Group, the Enrique Rason Group, has just recently procured a solar company there in the Philippines, where they export a lot of these solar panels. The United States is very much into that one. And there are other areas where they are looking at alternate sources of energy, which the Philippines can benefit from. A lot of this technology can be moved or be transferred to the Philippines if we have opportunities that are open for them to do joint venture for countries like ours. So overall, I think that move that was made by the Biden administration is very much in our favor, especially when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, there was a press item in the Philippine Star which says that the USAID is pushing solar energy in the Philippines, that there was some kind of a grant that will be made available. I don't know. Would you be familiar with that, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, yes. Solar energy is something that here in the United States right now. I know that there are a number of projects that are being set up that will be using solar energy as their main source of energy in some communities here. I'm not quite sure where, but I know in the sun areas, the sun states, as they call it, like Texas and other parts, where the solar energy is the in thing now as far as the alternate energy. And of course, we all know that electric cars are being developed extensively now by all the major players here in the United States. All the car manufacturers are now coming out with a fully electric vehicle. And soon there's going to be areas, again, that they're trying to develop that you don't need the driver anymore, or if you do, you just go into the highway and the rest will be taken care of by the car to take you to your destination and then exit, and then you take over again. So things like this are fast coming in, and the faster we try to let's say get ourselves up to speed with these new developments, the better we are in terms of being able to catch many of those investments coming to the Philippines.
There are some insights that our relationship with the United States has been uneven, quote unquote, considering the way they have assisted countries which were once their enemies. Mm-hmm. Okay, while we stood by them, we sent troops to Korea, we sent troops to Vietnam, but sometimes the attitude is rather lukewarm in the United States, and it's a comment made by one of our classmates. Do you have any particular insight on this, Ambassador?
I totally agree with that observation. But, like I said, I've been dealing with this country for many years in my own private capacity in the past. And I think the attitude has changed mainly because there is now a competitor. And quite honestly, I'll be straightforward and candid to say that I have used that to our advantage. I said that, look, if you treat us well, then we will remain with you. But we have another country that wants us to be their friends. So the more you try to be to at least respect us and not to take us for granted, the better it is for our relationship. Because if you do, and that's one thing I think that President Duterte has been able to do. I know some may not like his style of doing our foreign policy, but that's the reality of life. That every country has their own interest to protect. We have our own interest, and it's not in our interest to have one relationship and then just stick to that relationship, which is what happened, I think, in the past, that we were kind of too much veering towards the West, specifically the United States. We have to try to balance it off. And now I think, personally, my observation is that they're not taking us for granted. They are now really a little more, I would say, they tried their best to try to find out exactly what it is, the feeling that they have. Although I keep assuring them that the majority of them would like to see the United States remaining engaged in the Philippines, but do not take us for granted, because if you do, then that will erode the kind of relationship that we have down the road. And information is now readily available. We have the demographics. We have a lot of young people now in our country, and I think that many of them are more aware of what's really happening in the world. And so if the United States just treats us as if we were just an old colony, then sooner or later we'll just wake up and it'll be somebody else that we will be with, especially with China now becoming to be a really major economic power and a military power also at the same time. So
So it looks like it doesn't pay to be, it pays to play hard to get.
well, hard to get to a certain extent, but we should just simply sit around and say, everything that you tell us is good. We have to tell them that sometimes there are things that you do that are not quite good for us, and so we're not going to stick to you like anything that you say. So I can tell you that the feeling I have, and this is what I'm feeling right now, especially with this new administration of President Biden, they're more engaged, and not only with the Philippines but also in the ASEAN region, because many of our ASEAN neighbors and my colleagues here, the ASEAN ambassadors, feel the same way. In fact, they were quite disappointed that there's been no real engagement coming from the United States to the ASEAN region for so long, and it's only now that they're starting. And I'll tell you, every month now, the White House, the National Security Advisor, their office makes an effort to engage with the ASEAN ambassadors every month. And now they're proposing that each country will host a lunch with them, and then they will invite us also to have lunch at the White House to have a continuing dialogue on how the ASEAN region can play a role in the whole overall picture. Of course, we all know the reason for that is because they now have somebody that is challenging them, and that is China.
I remember in one conversation we had, private, and I think I can reveal this. We started talking about Burma, Myanmar, and the position of the United States and how ASEAN is getting affected by this. Are there any changes in the attitude of ASEAN and the United States working together with ASEAN in trying to sort out the situation in Burma or Myanmar?
Yes, well, our position has always been that we do not want to get involved in internal matters. But that's one aspect. But we all know that what's happening in Myanmar right now, with the military taking over, is not consistent with what many of the world would like to see, which is a country that is a democratic country. And so the U.S. has been urging the ASEAN. In fact, they're going to have another meeting with Secretary Blinken. The foreign ministers of the ASEAN will be having a meeting with them, mainly to discuss Myanmar. It's a very ticklish situation because Myanmar is of course part of the ASEAN, and you know that again, this is part of the overall global situation where you have countries that are being eroded into going into a different direction in terms of their system. And if the military remains in power in Myanmar, there is a fear that it can affect the other countries in Asia. So the United States is very much engaged in that one. Fortunately, the Myanmar ambassador is a very nice man. He's one of my good friends here now in Washington, D.C. And I feel very bad for him because they're sort of like isolating him to a certain extent. But that's the nature of what it is in diplomacy. When your country is not following a certain way, then you become a sort of like a pariah here in Washington, D.C., that like the Russian ambassador, who's also a good friend of mine, by the way. But he's back here now. I think the U.S. and Russia have agreed to send back their ambassadors back to their posts.
Now, during the time of, what was it? There was a time, I think during the time of Reagan, we had champions for the Philippines in Congress, one of whom was the late Stephen Solars, and several senators. I think Senator Lugar. Do we have such champions in
We do.
the U.S. Congress who have
Yes, we
become,
do. We have,
with whom you have formed personal relationship?
yes, we do have what we call the Philippine Caucus. As a matter of fact, they were my guests at the Independence Day celebration we had at the embassy. We have Congressman Bobby Scott, who is a Democrat. He is one of those that is very actively, and by the way, his grandmother, I think, is a Filipina, and so that's the reason why he loves the Philippines. And he's one of our champions in the U.S. Congress. And also we have Senator Don Sullivan from Alaska, who's a personal friend of mine. He's also one of those that are very supportive of the Philippines and the alliance that we have with them. So these are the two major, one in the Senate and one in the Congress. And we have also been able to get some of them to join us, like Senator Courtney, for instance, of Virginia. Is also another one who's a Democrat. He's also very supportive of the Philippines. And again, also in our mutual defense treaty, these are heads of the Armed Services Committee of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress. So they're very supportive of our effort to try and modernize our armed forces and to make it really reliable armed force that can defend our territories in the future. And we've been making a lot of headway on that one. I think you will see a new armed forces probably in the next 3 to 5 years as we continue to bump up our, hopefully the next administration will continue the program of modernizing the equipment of our armed forces, which they really deserve, especially our Air Force.
Back to there's a question here on how do you think the Americans perceive the Philippine market? Although you answered that somehow earlier about the changing regulations, but this time it's specifically the Philippine market versus our ASEAN
But hindi pa
neighbors.
hindi pa naka.
No. 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 Well,
Hello, sir. Kindly repeat the question. I accidentally interrupted the Zoom. Kindly repeat the question, sir. Thank you.
there is a question here, Mr. Ambassador. What is the perception of American businessmen now towards the Philippine market vis-a-vis our ASEAN neighbors?
Well, in what sense? I guess if you're talking about the Philippine market in terms of viability of businesses opening up, or is it our stock market, or what is that?
No, the viability of businesses, more along those lines.
Well, as I said earlier, the Philippines, we have an advantage here, especially in the United States. They all know the Philippines. We are, first of all, like I said, the people alone is a big asset in the sense that they know that we're an English-speaking people, and that of course, needless to say, the kind of relationships that we have with Americans is kind of special to a certain extent. So that is a big advantage for us. But the problem always is when it comes down to, and I think we've made some improvements as far as, for instance, doing business with the Philippines, but we still have there's a lot more room for improvement in the future, where we really have to open up our economy. I think our constitution has been very strict on too many things, while other countries have been able to open up even much faster, especially Thailand and Vietnam. They are our biggest competitors right now. Vietnam and Thailand are very aggressive. I tell you, sometimes we're talking to a business entity here in Washington, D.C., or sometimes in New York, and not too far behind or somewhere there, we already have Vietnam and Thailand also following up and seeing whether they can also be part of this business deal that we were trying to look at. So they're very, as we always say, we're very friendly with our ASEAN friends, but we are actually collaborators by day, but gladiators at night.
Yeah, well, that's the dynamics of our
Yeah.
relationship with our neighbors. We cooperate and we also compete.
Exactly.
They have the same products that we have, or almost similar agricultural products. Now, again, back to the military aspect of the relationship. What further help can the United States and its allies give for us, Philippines? We are the only non-NATO ally of the US to enforce our sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea.
Well, as I said, the Mutual Defense Treaty is really a treaty which I think it's been in place for 70 years now. President Duterte himself has said that I intend to keep our commitment with the treaty, and I think more than ever it has more teeth now because, as I said, the United States is prepared to really come in and help us, or at least defend us, or help. To be part of our defense when and if we tell them that we need them. No? That is the agreement that we have with them right now, is that they will not just come in on their own, but we will have to tell them that something has happened, and so we're asking that we invoke the military defense, or the Mutual Defense Treaty. And they're putting more teeth to that, as I said, by really giving us a lot of assistance in terms of our military. Training is one of them, which is the BFA, but the equipment that they're giving us is much, much more than we ever expected. And also, the most important one, which is we all know now that technology plays a major role, and the satellite system that they have in place is very vital to our security right now. And that kind of satellite system that they have covering many parts of the Philippines is very important, because now we can easily detect any kind of intrusion that's coming in. It's being given, that information is being shared to us by the US military.
Okay, well, there's another question here, and well, it says, are you coterminous with the president?
Yes, I am. As soon as he leaves on June 30th, I'm gone.
And if you do leave, and you will have a successor, what tips or what things should you pass on to him to make him or her more effective?
And I think the best thing is to really think Philippines. And there are many people who think that I am overly pro-American. I have to admit that I do like the United States as a country. We all have been here. I've lived here for many years. I finished my high school here. But at the end of the day, the Philippines is still our country, and so you have to think in terms of what is really best for our country. And it may be lip service, but when you think about when you're talking to them, especially when it is very crucial in terms of, for instance, the BFA is one example, and of course they talk to us here in the embassy. We have to think on what is really best for us, and that is what we pass on to the Philippines, or to what I pass on to Secretary Locsin or to Secretary Lorenzana, and I give them my inputs on what I think what we should do to be able to convince the Americans that this is the way to handle this. And as I said, it's time for us to really sort of like be independent in the strong sense of the word, that we really need to really start thinking that what is best for us is most important. Because the United States is doing the same thing. They will do what is best for their country, which rightly so. And China will do the same thing. But until we start really thinking that way, that is what working here, that is the job of the ambassador. We keep very good relations here, which I think we've been able to do to a certain extent, but at the same time be very firm on what is best for our country. That's the only advice I can give to whoever succeeds me here. And at the same time, the other thing is this, and I know this is a little bit off. Take care of the government facilities that are here. You know, we have so many assets here in the United States. The residence, the embassy in New York, we have a building. You know, those are symbols of that are very important, and that we should take care of it. And all those that are thinking of short-term thinkers of saying, oh, we cannot afford this, we should sell it. I don't think that that's the way to think. You know how it feels for many Filipinos when they walk in Fifth Avenue that they're building, they have a Philippine consulate that's right there. You know how it is when they come here, they're right on Massachusetts Avenue, they see the embassy with a flag and everything. That's a big thing. It may not mean too much to some people, but it is a big thing. And we are where we are because of what our predecessors have done, and we have to take care of it. We have to take care of this because these are properties of the Filipino people. It is not a property of whoever is occupying it at the moment. We have to take care of it, and that one, I will be very emphatic with whoever succeeds me. I hope that they will take care of it, which we did. We went out of our way. We went off and talked to our friends in the Philippine Congress to get a budget from them to be able to fix it up, whatever was wrong with it, and clean it up to make it really something that we should be proud of. Sa atin to eh.
Yeah, there have been attempts before, no, to sell these assets. Now, there's another question. What is the thrust and objective now of U.S.-Philippine Business Council?
The U.S.
Philippines Business Council. There is such a.
Well, it's actually the U.S. Philippine Society, which was formed, I think, about 10 years ago, and well, it's been quite effective. These are mostly composed of former ambassadors who served in the Philippines, U.S. ambassadors who served in the Philippines. Like, for instance, Ambassador John Negroponte. John Negroponte is one of the most respected ambassadors, former ambassadors of the United States. He's a Republican, but at the same time, he has good relationship with the Democratic government, or the Democrats right now. And they've been quite helpful in terms of our diplomatic work here in the United States. But I always tell them that this U.S.-Philippine Society should not get involved in the politics of the Philippines. In other words, the idea is that this is the bridge between all governments, the government here and the government in the Philippines. When there is a change of government in the Philippines, they are sort of like the center of that one to bridge it to the next one. We should not be siding with one or the other. We can have political differences, but at the end of the day, it's a relationship that they should work for. So the U.S.-Philippine Society, I've advised them, that is the role that they should play. They should really make sure that the relationship continues to be strong and stable.
Ambassador, you mentioned earlier about Filipino Americans being active there. In what areas and in what areas are they active in terms of community affairs and even in governance? Because some of them they are American citizens too, so they're serving in this. They're in the civil service too. Would you have any idea, given your close contact with the community?
Yes. Well, like I said, the Filipino community here, they're in almost many sectors of society here in the United States. Foremost of which, of course, is the frontliners. You know that very well. The health workers here, a majority of them, especially in New York, doctors and nurses, were Filipinos, and they are the most preferred all the time. You know, the late George Bush Sr. had a Filipino nurse who took care of him for the 2 years of his final days here on Earth, and he was very proud about it. I remember I had a conversation with the son of former President George Bush Jr., and he said that, oh, Filipino, my father loved, his Filipino nurse, and I said, well, that's what we're good for. I mean, many of our nurses are one of the best in the world, and they're much appreciated. And we all know all the stories that have come out, even the one in the UK, where even the Prime Minister Boris Johnson actually came out and openly praised the Filipino health worker. So that's one sector and then there are quite a number of successful businessmen also here in the United States. Some of them you don't hear, but they've been quite doing very well here in the East Coast. For instance, we have what we call him Tito Al. He's been very successful in bringing in Filipino goods here in the United States, and everybody knows him. And he's a very nice man, and he sells millions of Philippine products here in the United States, and he now has spread out to many parts here in the East Coast. And then, of course, we have people, Filipino Americans, who are in government. One of our good friends now with the State Department, for instance, is the Deputy Secretary of East Asia, which is perfect, and his name is Richard Buwangan. The name Buwangan alone will tell you he's a Filipino. A very nice man, and he's very, very actively really looking at the Philippines as really a country that he wants to see to remain close to the United States. So they're all over here, and that's the best part of being an ambassador, because we have a lot of Filipinos that are very much appreciated in this country.
Now we shift to agriculture. It says here, the majority of Filipinos still depend on agriculture as their main livelihood. The United States is probably the world leader in agricultural technology. Can something be done to get the US to help the Philippines more in this regard?
Our agriculture attaché, unfortunately, she's leaving now. Her name is Dr. Joy Havelosa. She's being moved. She was here for 10 years, and she just moved. As a matter of fact, just yesterday only, she just had her last day, and she's moving to Rome. I think we have a new agriculture. She was very active here in the agriculture, and we've been able to do a lot. She's been able to do a lot, and I've been very supportive of her. I've worked with her for the past 2.5 to 3 years here in Washington, and agriculture is a main, I would say, sector in our country that really can use a lot of American technology and also a lot of agricultural products that we can either export or import in the Philippines. So we need a good agricultural attaché here, and I hope that her replacement, Dr. Joy Havelosa of the Department of Agriculture, will have a good replacement that will actively get involved in trying to get a lot of these technologies and also trying to open up markets for our agricultural products. We have quite a lot of them that are coming in here now. And I think we can do more. We can export quite a lot here. Because as I said, even Filipino cuisine is very popular here in the United States now. People actually love to eat Filipino food. And I don't know if anyone has heard of a restaurant called the Bad Saint, which is a Filipino cuisine cooked in a different way, but it's quite popular here in Washington, D.C. President Obama has eaten there, I think, 3 or 4 times. And there's another one called Kaliwa, which is also quite popular in the waterfront. So just here in Washington alone, you have a lot of Filipino restaurants, but in the East Coast, I mean, in New York, we have a number of them, in the West Coast. So all that will translate into the fact that because they love Filipino food, they can taste the Filipino products, so to speak, and so that can promote agriculture in the Philippines, just like what other countries are doing.
There was this girl, I think, who used the name of NASA, I understand, the National Aeronautics Space Administration of the US. There was some kind of a hymn that was produced by this Filipino, which the NASA people are using. I heard about that. Maybe it's just a rumor. Anyway, I have no more questions here unless my co-conveners would want to unmute themselves and ask you directly. If there, from the audience, we're not getting any more questions in the chat box. Maybe it's time to wrap up. Mr. Ambassador, you may want to give your closing remarks and before we thank you for the time. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Popoy. I really appreciate this opportunity to really talk about our relationship here in the United States and give me a chance to be able to talk to some of our schoolmates from LaSalle. I've always been proud of being a student of LaSalle and an alumni of LaSalle. As I said, I think I learned how to get along with people because of people like you, Popoy, who taught me how to get along with people. So, and I'm very proud of it. So I just want to thank all of you for giving me a chance to just talk to you. And then this kind of conversations are very helpful for me because it also refreshes my mind on the things that I have to say here whenever I meet with people. So as I said, it's an opportunity that I really enjoyed, and I hope to see you guys really soon, and I hope you keep safe and get your vaccine vaccinated soon.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for all of your efforts. It's almost 11 o'clock in the evening there.
Yes.
So we know that it's way past your bedtime and your work hours. So we don't want to detain you. So we would like to thank you so much. And Mark, Dominic, Lynn, who's also with us, and all of the participants who are here who have attended. I saw in the list former Secretary of Finance Cesar Purisima, George Barcelon, and several others, June Aguirre, and we'd like to thank them for their participation. The next forum will be around middle of July, and we will have a discussion on the political situation in terms of surveys and all of these readings of the market. So we'd like to thank everyone for being here, and we'd like to thank again Ambassador Romualdez for his presence. So mabuhay kayo lahat. God bless. Take care and stay safe. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.